Hello. In this tutorial, I'm gonna be covering this kind of effect using the compositor. It's quite useful just to cover a number of compositing ideas, adding blur, adding lens glares and things like that. Normal cameras obviously have a depth of field, and it's necessary to achieve that kind of effect. So I'm going to close this and we go straight into achieving that. So we start with the scene we had last time. Before we continue, I'm going to go straight into the render layers, which we were discussing last time, and add a new layer. It's going to be called set depth. The purpose of this new layer is for me to contain information about the distance of objects in each pixel. Obviously, up here in the right hand corner we have a far away object, the ground. In the mid frame we have something in the middle distance, and close to us we have something closer, a lower value. And Blender can hold this kind of information and keep that in the render output. For this we want to include both the parquet and the monkey as a set depth output. We don't want to render a really accurate image when we render out the set depth, so we set the samples to 1. 0 means it uses the default settings sampling here. You can override the sampling here to set it to something more desirable for this particular layer. Sometimes you're not interested in an accurate image, which we are not in case of set depth. So now we have this set depth render layer set up. We are secondly going straight into the camera settings and selecting the camera properties dialog. So you have to have the camera selected and select the camera. And we go down to a section called depth of field. It gives you the ability to put in a particular object that should be in focus. Now, by default, everything is in focus in the render engine. That is because we have essentially a pinhole camera setup with an input aperture of size 0. Now, everything is in focus in the pinhole camera. You can have the rendering engine blur the foreground and the background, but that doesn't give you so much flexibility in post-processing, so we'd rather do it in post-processing using the compositor. So we'll render out crystal clear images, but at the depth of field in the compositor. The compositor will actually use this focus setting of the camera, so we have to have set this up already. Now we go straight into the compositor. There's a compositor kind of preset which has set up all the panels you need for compositing. So we'll select that here. This is essentially just the regular node editor that you used for adding materials to objects. Now this is the material menu, and this one here is the compositing, node-based compositing tab. Now we have to tell Blender that we're going to use nodes for compositing, so we set use nodes. We should set backdrop, and it's kind of convenient to have auto render on, although you can leave it unchecked. So we haven't rendered anything out, so let's begin by rendering. Okay, we have the layers rendered now. By default, we have only one layer as input, as a render layer input, and it goes straight into the final composite image. However, we have two other layers, so let's duplicate this render layer here and duplicate again. That means Shift D is the hotkey for duplicating, as normally. We'll select the monkey here, and we'll select the set depth output here. We're not interested in the image output and alpha output here. In fact, I should have turned those off. I could have turned those off in passes here, and then it wouldn't show those. No, sorry, I shouldn't do that on the parquet. I should do it on a set depth. Okay, so now we only have set as output on this set depth layer. Now, when combining two images we essentially have here a monkey rendered and the parquet, but we want to combine them. We want to put the monkey on top of the parquet. We do that with a special node called alpha over here, and it basically takes the image and alpha channel, the lower image input, lets through the image where there is an alpha transparency from the above image, but composites on top of that the image that is from below. So the result is this. I should say that there is a lot of detail available to each of these nodes, and we can find them all on the Blender wiki or the Blender manual on the Blender website. It's quite easy to find by googling these nodes, Blender and the name of the node, to find out exactly how it works. I'm not going to get into much detail, and often I'm not too interested in detail. I'm interested in getting the desired effect, but it's not too hard to read about the final details of these object things here. So we've now have the composite image here, a simple composite, crystal clear, no blurriness in it. We can, for usefulness, we can add this viewer. This is a special kind of output that allows you to see in the backdrop what is going on in each node. You can always look at the output of each node specifically here. Instead of just looking at the final composite, you can look at what's going along the pipeline, because this can be quite complicated in the end after you have built up a few effects. Now let's add a lens blur immediately. We'll go into the filter and go to defocus. Add that in there. In the defocus node, we should check the use set buffer. That means it will take the pixel map depths as input, and it automatically uses the camera information in the camera settings down here, the focus point. Now the f-stop is still very small, so we should set it up to something that a bigger aperture that allows a depth of field. We'll set it to 3, and we should see a blurriness here in the final result. Now, to see this in the backdrop, we should duplicate the viewer and select it here out of the defocus. So now we can see there's a blurriness in the foreground and the background. To get a very precise calculation, we should turn off preview. Preview, when you have preview selected, you're just doing it slightly inaccurately for speed, to increase the efficiency of the workflow. Now cameras often display other effects such as lens flares, so let's go and add a lens flare. So that's the glare node here. Let's add that as a second effect, and it matters of course in which order you do things. I imagine the glare is essentially independent of defocusing. The defocusing should happen first and then a glare, and we see now this kind of glare. I prefer the simple star type of glare, so it looks a little more natural. And a third kind of effect is dispersion, color dispersion in the fringes, the periphery of the lens, or the lens image. So we do that by selecting distortion and lens distortion, and then we can add a number of effects related to lenses. Seems like also something related to the camera sensor, but you can read about that. But so dispersion, we can set this to a moderate value of 0.05, and then we should begin to see some color separation in the outer edges of the image, and maybe even closer, maybe even set this a little higher, 0.1, and it should become quite clear. I think it is a little bluish here on the edge there, and although not so clear with this parquet, but we can see it here in the edge of the image. Okay, yeah. Oh, and then the edge here of the shadow of the light source here, light source shadow. So my time is up. To improve the result of this image, we can quickly duplicate the monkey, Shift D. It would look a little better if you had a few objects in the foreground. No, okay, this auto render is really annoying me. I should turn it off. So we can rotate the monkey here, RZ, such, and we can duplicate again. Bring that back, such, rotate Z. You can do this as many times as you like. Duplicate, and just to get a little more effect. And now you can do the final render. Turn up your sampling to something quite accurate, make it 400, say. Turn up your resolution if you like, and press render. Okay, so my rendering has finished, and now I have this final composite image down here on the right. We can always save a copy of this result by pressing image, save a copy, and calling it, say, demo.png. So this simple basic tutorial to the compositor is now finished.